What's going on, guys? My name is Matt, and recently Micro Center lowered the price of 9700Ks and 9900Ks to $220 and $320 respectively. While Ryzen certainly is the current value king, a $220 8-core overclockable Intel CPU is a hard bargain to ignore. Because of this, I teamed up with Micro Center to bring you a super powerful gaming PC featuring one of these CPUs for the price of $1,000. Now, if you haven't heard of Micro Center, they're basically the best place to buy PC parts in store, and currently they have a promotion where just showing up there will get you a free 32GB flash drive and microSD card absolutely free, and there will be more info on this in the description below. They also have a new PC builder that allows you to part out a system using parts that are in store and ready to be purchased. To find a Micro Center near you, check out their PC builder and their new PC build showcase area where you can show off your build, then check the links in the description. So like I said before, I wanted to make this a $1,000 PC. Because of this, it made the most sense to go for the i7 9700K over the 9900K. The main difference between the two is the fact that the 9900K is hyper-threading and the 9700K does not. The 9700K is an 8-core, 8-thread CPU based on Intel's Coffee Lake architecture. The K in the name signifies that this is in fact an overclockable CPU, but even stock performance is super impressive. While gaming and using other multi-threaded applications, this chip stayed at 4.6 GHz across all cores, which is pretty awesome. For $220, this is an absolute steal, and if you can get one at this price point, then I would highly recommend it. One downside of going with an Intel CPU like the 9700K is the fact it comes with no stock cooler at all. This makes sense because of how powerful they are, but when you look at many of AMD's CPUs, even chips like the 3900X come with a decent stock cooler. With all this being said, getting an adequate cooler for the 9700K isn't very expensive. For example, I picked up this ID Cooling SE224XT CPU cooler for right around $25. For $25, you're getting an all-black tower-style cooler with 4 copper heat pipes, a good-sized aluminum fin array, and an included 120mm fan. This cooler worked out very well for stock performance on the 9700K, but if you plan on overclocking, you may want to upgrade to something a little bit beefier. With this being said, as you will see in the benchmarks, this cooler kept our CPU in check and allowed for more than adequate temps. Moving on to the motherboard, this is another area where shopping at a Micro Center will save you some money. When you purchase a 9700K and incompatible motherboard, you're going to get $40 off the price for comboing them together. Because I wanted the most value for money possible, I steered away from the high-end Intel boards. After doing some research, I found that the Gigabyte Z390UD offers the best value for money of the budget Z390 boards. This is a $130 motherboard, but again, pairing the 9700K and this board together makes the total cost $310 for these two parts combined, which is a great deal in my opinion. The Z390UD has pretty much all the features you could want on an entry-level Z390 board, including 4 DIMM slots, a ton of PCIe expansion, an M.2 slot, a decent VRM setup, and decent backpanel I/O. I also like the neutral color scheme, which allows it to fit aesthetically into a bunch of different builds. Overall, for $130, this board is great for 9700Ks and 9900Ks at stock performance or with mild overclocks. If you're wanting to do any major overclocking, then you should be looking to spend closer to $200 on a motherboard, but for me, this is all I needed. Moving on to RAM, this is an area where speed doesn't matter quite as much when in comparison to a Ryzen-based system. With that being said, it's still a good idea to get a dual channel kit with decent speeds. What I went with is a 2x8GB kit of GCO Ripjaws 5 memory at 3200MHz CL16. For around $60, this is a pretty good value for the money, and I've used these Ripjaw 5 kits in many builds in the past, and they've never let me down. 16GB is more than enough for gaming and is a good amount for streaming and 1080p video editing. With this being said, RAM is super cheap right now, so upgrading to 32GB for $40 to $50 more might not be a bad idea. Moving on to storage, this is an area where I had to make a slight compromise to keep the system within the $1,000 budget. What I went with is a 512GB NVMe drive from Inland. This is an Inland Premium Series drive, and because it's an NVMe drive, the speeds on this guy are super fast, and the M.2 form factor it's in makes installation super simple and eliminates the need to run a SATA data and power cable the way you would need to do for a 2.5-inch drive. 500GB is more than enough for your OS, applications, and a number of your most played games. Normally I would have liked to get a 1TB drive at this budget, but I couldn't make it fit. With this being said, upgrading storage is super simple and takes about 5 minutes. Moving on to the graphics card, this is the part that takes the system from basic computer to a gaming beast. What I went with is the AMD RX 5700 XT. The 5700 XT comes in a little over $400 and offers a lot of performance for that price. This is the Asus TUF gaming model, which features a very substantial triple fan cooling system with a large aluminum and copper heat pipe heatsink. This card does use a good amount of power, but again, the performance it puts out is great, which you'll see in the benchmarks. This card has 8GB of video memory, and overall I like the look of it a lot. Now yes, there are new AMD cards being announced soon, but availability is likely going to be very scarce, so for now this GPU is a great option. Next up, let's talk about the power supply. The 9700K and the 5700 XT are both pretty power hungry components, so I needed a power supply that was going to output plenty of clean power for the entire system. Because of this, I went for a power supply from Micro Center's in-house brand PowerSpec. This is the PS750 BSM. Like the name implies, this is a 750 watt power supply with an efficiency rating of 90 plus bronze. This is a solid unit, and my only complaint is the ketchup and mustard cables on the 24 pin and 8 pin CPU cables. Other than that, it worked great, and for around $80, this is a pretty good deal, especially when you consider all the features like its semi-modular design. Finally, let's talk about the case. What I went with is the Thermaltake V200 RGB. This is an $80 case that offers a lot of features at this price. It has 4 included fans, 3 of which are RGB. It has a tempered glass side panel, a power supply basement, and plenty of room for cable management. Now it does have a closed off front panel, but there is some venting for it, and overall temps were fine in this case. Building in this case was very easy, and overall for $80 I can definitely recommend it for your next PC build. For $1,000 you're getting a system with a lot of performance and with parts that are going to work well for years to come. If you guys would have spent this budget differently, let me know how you would have used it in the comments below. Now let's talk about performance, and honestly I was very surprised with how well this system performed. I decided to test everything at 1080p, but keep in mind the system's more than capable of playing any game you throw at it in 1440p, and if you'd like to see 1440p benchmarks along with the 1080p benchmarks in the future, then let me know in the comments below. Let's start things off by talking about COD Warzone. I tested at 1080p high settings and saw the FPS stay in the mid to upper 100s and never saw it drop below 144 FPS, which is awesome to see and shows you that for a game like COD Warzone, the system's all you really need, even for competitive play. Moving on to Borderlands 3, I tested this game using the built-in benchmark at 1080p high settings. Doing this resulted in an impressive 101 FPS average, which is pretty good for a demanding game like Borderlands 3. Next up is Fortnite, which I tested at 1080p pro settings. In a Team Rumble match, doing this resulted in an overall average of around 300 FPS. This was a very smooth and enjoyable experience. Next up is Shadow the Tomb Raider, which I tested at 1080p high using the built-in benchmark. Doing this resulted in an average of 137 FPS. This is a really impressive score and shows that AAA gaming at high refresh rates is very doable on this machine. Now let's talk about Rainbow Six Siege, which I tested at 1080p very high settings using the built-in benchmark. Doing this resulted in a ridiculously high 408 FPS average and shows that the system is super overkill for a game like Rainbow Six. Next up is Apex Legends, which I tested at 1080p with pretty much max settings. Doing this resulted in an almost locked 144 FPS, which was very smooth and enjoyable. Finally, I tested Doom Eternal at 1080p ultra settings. With these settings, the system stayed in the upper 100s most of the time and never really dropped below that 144 FPS mark. Overall, the performance on the system is amazing, and for $1,000, the value per dollar is actually really good. Again, these are prices from Micro Center, but if you don't have one near you, I'll link the parts from other stores in the description too. Thanks again to Micro Center for partnering up with me on this build. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you want to see more Micro Center builds like this, then let me know in the comments below, and I'll make sure to make that happen. So yeah guys, I think this wraps this video up. If you guys enjoyed it, make sure to give it a thumbs up and also consider subscribing. And as always, this is Matt from Tech by Matt, signing out.